They arrive to mark the last moment before reality rearranges itself. You will only see this book once, right before everything changes. Some books do not arrive to teach. Prologue, the moment before the shift. There is a moment that almost no one recognizes, not because it is invisible, but because it looks too ordinary. It is the last normal day, the last familiar breath, the last version of reality that still pretends nothing is coming. And yet something has already moved, not in the world, in the field beneath it. Before events change, the atmosphere changes. Before life breaks open, the silence deepens. Before the timeline turns, something inside you starts to detach. You don't know why. You just feel it. A strange pause, a subtle pressure, a sense that the world is still the same, but no longer stable. This is the moment this book appears. Not after the shift, not during the chaos. Before. Because once everything changes, you would not hear it the same way. This is not a book that arrives to teach. It arrives to mark the threshold. You will only see it once, and if you are reading it now, then the shift has already begun. Chapter 1. The universe always warns first. The universe never begins with impact. It begins with atmosphere. Before anything breaks, before anything changes, before anything becomes irreversible, the field shifts quietly. Reality does not announce transformation with noise. It announces it with strangeness. Things feel slightly off. Timing becomes irregular. Silence stretches longer than usual, and most people ignore it. They are trained to look for events, not for signals. But every major transformation is preceded by a phase where nothing is obvious, only unsettling. This is the quantum precursor, the stage where the future has already moved, but the present has not caught up yet. In this phase, the world still looks the same, but it no longer behaves the same way. Conversations feel oddly timed. Familiar routines lose their grip. Motivation fluctuates without explanation. Sleep changes. Attention drifts. Small coincidences appear and disappear before the mind can label them as meaningful. Nothing dramatic happens, and that is precisely the warning. The universe does not shock systems into change unless resistance is extreme. When transformation is inevitable, it starts by loosening attachment. It removes certainty first, comfort second, identity last. The before is always stranger than the after, because the after has form. It has narrative. It has explanation. The before has none of that. It is undefined, unstructured, and therefore deeply uncomfortable for the mind. This is why people misinterpret the signs. They assume something is wrong. They think they are anxious, distracted, unmotivated, out of alignment. They attempt to fix what is actually dissolving on purpose, but the precursor phase is not malfunction. It is reconfiguration without instructions. Quantum systems never collapse randomly. They reorganize when the existing structure can no longer hold coherence. The warning phase is the moment coherence begins to thin. The old configuration still exists, but it has lost inevitability. This is when intuition becomes louder than logic, not clearer, not wiser, just louder. You begin to sense outcomes before they happen. You feel endings without reasons. You become restless not because you want something new, but because what exists no longer fits tightly around you. The mind resists this phase aggressively. It demands clarity. It demands plans. It demands reassurance. But reassurance would delay the shift, so the universe does not provide it. Instead, it creates subtle misalignments that force attention inward. Things you once tolerated become unbearable. Things you once chased feel hollow. The internal compass begins to spin, not to confuse you, but to detach you from directions that are about to expire. This is the warning most people miss. They expect the universe to warn them with signs they can explain, but explanation only comes after the collapse. Before that, the warning arrives as a feeling that does not belong to any story yet, a sense that time is folding, that something is ending without permission, that the version of reality you are standing in is already unstable. This instability is not chaos, it is preparation. The universe always warns first because abrupt change destroys coherence, and coherence matters. Even when a life must change completely, the system needs a soft opening to release pressure gradually. That soft opening is discomfort without cause. People who trust this phase move with less damage. People who resist it experience shock later. The warning is mercy disguised as confusion. This is why this book appears here, not after the shift, when everything is obvious, not during the collapse, when nothing can be done, but in the quiet interval where the world is still standing, and yet already rearranging itself beneath your feet. If you are reading this and feel that familiar explanations no longer satisfy you, it is not because you need more information. It is because information is about to lose authority. What comes next does not begin with understanding. It begins with recognition, and recognition always arrives before proof. This chapter is not telling you what will change. It is telling you that the warning has already been issued. The universe has moved first. The only question now is whether you will notice it before everything else catches up. Chapter 2. The quantum field moves before the event. The physical world is always late. What you call an event is never the beginning. It is the visible arrival of something that has already been forming quietly beneath perception. Reality does not start when you see it. It starts when the field shifts. Long before a door opens, something in the architecture of possibility rearranges itself. Long before a phone call changes your life, the space around that call has already been prepared. Long before you lose something, gain something, meet someone, leave somewhere, the quantum field has already moved. The physical world is the last layer to respond. This is why the before feels strange. You are sensing movement without form. The quantum field does not speak in sentences. It does not send obvious signs. It does not warn you with clear instructions. It changes the probability structure first. It adjusts the invisible pattern beneath reality. And only later does the physical world collapse into an outcome you can name. Most people misunderstand this. They believe life is linear. First, something happens, then you feel something. But the truth is inverted. First, the field shifts. Then the nervous system registers it. Then the mind tries to explain it. Then finally, the world produces the event. This is why you sometimes feel endings before they arrive. This is why you sense a change in someone's energy before they speak it aloud. This is why you can walk into a room and know something is different, even when nothing has occurred yet. You are not imagining it. You are detecting the delay. The physical world is dense. It moves slowly. It requires time to reorganize, but the field beneath it is immediate. It is already responding to what is coming, not because it predicts, but because it is the space where prediction and outcome are not separate. In the quantum layer, the future is not a destination. It is a pressure. It exists as a pull on the present. This is why certain moments feel inevitable before they happen. You do not know the details. You do not know the form. But you feel the weight of an approaching collapse. Possibility narrows. The timeline tightens. The air changes. The field begins to close around a single direction. And when that happens, the physical world follows. But it follows late. That delay is where most suffering is created. Because the mind lives in the physical layer. It trusts what it can see. It assumes nothing is real until it arrives as proof, so it keeps acting as if nothing is changing, even while everything underneath is shifting. This creates dissonance. You continue your routines, but they feel thin. You speak your normal words, but they do not land the same way. You chase familiar goals, but they lose emotional gravity. The field has moved, and the old reality is still pretending it hasn't. This is the precursor state, the quantum response before the event. It is the moment where life has already decided something, but matter has not caught up. In this phase, synchronicities begin to sharpen, not as cute coincidences, but as structural signals. People appear unexpectedly. Information finds you without search. Doors close without drama. Delays protect you. Accelerations trap you. Timing becomes too precise to dismiss. The field is aligning outcomes before they manifest. This is why you only see this book once. Because this book belongs to the delay. It belongs to the interval where the quantum shift has already occurred, but the physical world has not yet delivered the visible turning point. After the event arrives, you will call it fate. You will call it change. You will call it the moment everything transformed. But the truth is quieter. Everything transformed before you noticed. The event is only the echo. The field moved first. And if you are sensitive enough to be here now, reading this chapter, then you are already inside that movement. The physical world will catch up soon. It always does. But by the time it does, you will realize something unsettling. The shift did not begin when life changed. Life changed because the shift had already begun. Chapter 3. Why you feel it before you understand it. The body is always earlier than the mind. Understanding is slow. Emotion is immediate. Before your thoughts can form a sentence, your nervous system has already registered the shift. Before logic can organize meaning, the body has already detected the change in the field. This is not intuition as poetry. It is biology as antenna. You feel it first, because feeling is older than language. The mind evolved to explain what is already happening. The body evolved to survive what is about to happen. That is the difference. The universe does not communicate through clarity. It communicates through sensation, through pressure, through subtle alterations in your internal atmosphere that arrive without explanation. A tightness in the chest for no reason. A restlessness that does not belong to any story. A sudden fatigue that feels like gravity, not tiredness. A quiet knowing that something is ending, even while everything looks the same. Most people treat these signals as noise. They assume anxiety, hormones, stress, overthinking, but often it is none of these. It is the body receiving information the mind cannot yet interpret. The quantum field moves first. The nervous system responds second. The mind arrives third, late, asking for reasons. This is why the before is so uncomfortable. You feel something without being able to name it. And the mind hates unnamed things. The mind demands explanation because explanation restores control. But the precursor phase is precisely the moment control begins to dissolve. The body senses instability long before the event becomes visible. This is not mystical, it is structural. Your nervous system is designed to detect patterns before they collapse into form. It reads microshifts in timing, energy, behavior, atmosphere. It notices what is missing before you consciously realize you were relying on it. The mind lives in events. The body lives in signals. This is why you sometimes feel that a conversation will change your life before it happens. You sense that a relationship is ending before the words are spoken. You know a door is closing before you touch the handle. The body perceives the field. The mind perceives the outcome. Emotion is not irrational. Emotion is pre-rational. It is information without language. That is why it arrives first. The tragedy is that most people override it. They numb it. They distract from it. They medicate it with noise, because sitting with a feeling that has no explanation feels like instability. But instability is the message. The body is telling you the timeline is shifting, not in the dramatic way you expect, in the subtle way reality always begins. This is why the most important changes do not start with fireworks. They start with discomfort that cannot be justified. You begin to lose appetite for certain things, not because you chose to, but because the field has already moved beyond them. You begin to feel distant from your old routines, not because you are ungrateful, but because the structure that held them is thinning. You begin to feel strange in your own life. That strangeness is not a problem. It is the warning. The mind wants certainty. The body wants coherence. When coherence begins to dissolve, the body alerts you first. It does not say, something will happen. It says, something is already happening. This is why emotional sensitivity is dangerous in certain systems, because it makes you harder to control. You feel shifts before instructions arrive. You move before permission is given. You detach before the world tells you to. This is why many people are taught to distrust their own signals. But this book does not ask you to interpret emotion as meaning. It asks you to recognize emotion as timing. You are not feeling too much. You are feeling too early. The mind will catch up later, as it always does, and it will call the coming event obvious. It will rewrite the timeline into a story that makes sense. But the body will remember. The body will remember that it knew before it understood, that it sensed the shift in the air before reality admitted it. This is the quantum precursor, emotion as antenna. And if you are reading this chapter now, feeling something you cannot explain, then the field has already moved. The mind is simply late to the announcement. Chapter 4. The one-time door. There are doors inside the human experience that do not behave like opportunities. They do not open repeatedly. They do not wait. They do not return. They open once. And the moment you pass through them, something becomes impossible, pretending. Most people believe change happens gradually, as a choice, as a process, as a decision made over time. But the deepest transformations do not unfold like that. They occur as thresholds, a single internal crossing, a moment where something clicks, not as motivation, but as recognition. And once recognized, the old reality cannot be believed in the same way again. This is the one-time door. It is not external. It is not a job, a relationship, a place, a circumstance. It is an internal event where perception shifts so quietly that nothing outside you changes. Yet everything becomes different. The door does not announce itself. It looks like an ordinary day, an ordinary sentence, an ordinary realization. But afterward, the mind cannot return to innocence. You may continue living the same life externally, but internally you have crossed into a new field of awareness. The world still speaks in the old language, but you no longer fully understand it. Not because it is unclear, because it is incomplete. The one-time door often opens when you are not seeking it. In fact, seeking keeps it closed. The door opens when the system inside you reaches saturation, when the mind has tried every explanation, when the identity has exhausted every strategy. And then, without effort, the door appears. A quiet moment of seeing, not learning, seeing. And seeing cannot be undone. This is why certain knowledge was never meant to be repeated, because repetition implies choice. But thresholds are not choices, they are crossings. After the door opens, you cannot go back to the version of yourself that needed to be convinced. You cannot return to the comfort of not knowing. Even if you try, the attempt feels artificial. The old ignorance does not fit anymore. This is what makes the door forbidden. Not because it is evil, not because it is dangerous, but because it is irreversible. The world is built on reversible states, on people being able to forget, to normalize, to return. Systems depend on your ability to go back to sleep. The one-time door ends that. Once you see what you see, you can still participate in life, but you cannot fully pretend that the old script is real. You notice the patterns, the pacing, the illusions, the invisible machinery behind urgency. And once noticed, urgency loses its spell. This is why the door is internal. No one can prove you crossed it. No one can confirm it. There is no certificate, no public moment, only the silent awareness that something in you is no longer compatible with the previous world. The one-time door does not make you special. It makes you unable to return. That is all. And that is enough. If this book is in front of you now, it is not because you are curious. It is because the door is already opening. The shift has already begun. The old timeline is already thinning. This chapter is not inviting you to step through. It is simply telling you the truth. Some doors do not open twice, and once they do, you will never again be able to pretend you did not see. Chapter 5. The chapter that cannot be repeated. Some chapters are written to be remembered. This one was written to be crossed. The difference is subtle, but absolute. A chapter meant to be remembered gives you something to carry forward. A chapter meant to be crossed removes something that cannot be carried back. This is why it cannot be repeated. The mechanism of no return is not about danger. It is about perception. Once a certain internal recognition occurs, repetition becomes impossible, because the reader is no longer the same reader. You cannot read the same threshold twice. The first time is discovery. The second time is only memory. And memory cannot recreate the moment before knowing. This is why the book is not designed for rereading. It is not a text to study. It is a fragment to pass through, like a door in a corridor that only exists while you are approaching it. Once behind you, it disappears. The mechanism works like this. The chapter does not add information. It alters orientation. It shifts the internal axis from which you experience reality. And once the axis shifts, the previous position cannot be inhabited again. You may remember it intellectually, but you cannot return emotionally. You may quote it, but you cannot re-enter the ignorance that made it feel sharp. This is the irreversible law of crossing. Most books are loops. You return, you extract more, you deepen understanding. This fragment is not a loop, it is a line. It moves forward and does not curve back. That is why it was removed. Because anything that cannot be repeated cannot be controlled. Systems rely on repetition, ritual, practice, reinforcement, predictable cycles of learning. But this chapter breaks cycles. It creates a singular event inside the reader, a one-time collapse of the need to seek. And once the need collapses, the rest of the manuscript loses function. This is why the chapter was never meant to be integrated into a complete system. It ends the system. It is not a teaching, it is an exit. The reader often does not notice the crossing in the moment. There is no dramatic realization, no fireworks, no transformation montage, only a quiet shift. Later they realize that something they once carried is missing. The constant urge to interpret, the need to hurry, the compulsion to become. The chapter did not take these things violently, it simply made them unnecessary. That is why rereading fails. The first reading works because the reader still believes the old urgency is real. The chapter dissolves it. The second reading finds nothing left to dissolve. It is like striking a match in a room that has already burned. There is no ignition, only ash. This is why the chapter cannot be repeated, not because the words change, but because the internal condition required for the effect no longer exists. The book is meant to be traversed once, at the precise moment before everything changes. It is not meant to become a companion. It is not meant to become a practice. It is not meant to become a religion. It is meant to be a threshold. You do not live in thresholds. You pass through them, and once you pass through, the only thing that remains is the knowledge that you cannot return to the version of yourself that had not yet crossed. That version is gone, not destroyed, completed. This is the mechanism of no return. The chapter is not a lesson, it is a crossing. And if you are reading it now, you are not collecting information. You are moving through the last moment where pretending was still possible. After this, the book does not follow you. It simply ends, and something unnecessary ends with it. Chapter 6, The Hidden Reason. This was not public. This knowledge was never hidden because it was false. It was hidden because it disrupts rhythm, not belief, not morality, rhythm. Society is not organized primarily by truth or lies. It is organized by timing, by shared urgency, by synchronized movement. People wake, work, pursue, wait, rush, repeat. This collective cadence keeps systems stable, predictable, and scalable. What this chapter produces is desynchronization, and desynchronization is dangerous to any structure that depends on coordinated effort. When an individual loses internal urgency, they do not stop functioning. They stop rushing. They stop aligning their nervous system to artificial deadlines. They stop responding to pressure that is not immediately real. Their tempo changes, and one altered tempo inside a synchronized system creates friction. This is why the knowledge could not circulate in mass, not because everyone would awaken, but because enough people would stop moving on cue. Systems can handle dissent. They can handle rebellion. They can even handle collapse. What they cannot handle is widespread loss of urgency without opposition. A person who rebels still reacts to the system. A person who disengages from urgency does not. This chapter does not teach people to refuse participation. It removes the internal pressure that makes participation compulsive. People still work, still relate, still live, but they no longer move at the same speed for the same reasons. This creates a problem that cannot be solved politically or morally. How do you motivate someone who no longer feels late? How do you pressure someone who no longer feels behind? How do you accelerate someone whose internal clock has slowed without resistance? You cannot. That is the hidden reason. If this knowledge spread openly, it would not create chaos overnight. It would create delay, missed cues, slower responses, reduced urgency, quiet inefficiency in systems designed for constant acceleration. Deadlines would lose emotional force. Status would lose urgency. Comparison would weaken. Fear would lose timing, not everywhere, not immediately, but enough to matter. This is why the knowledge was not framed as forbidden truth. Forbidden truth creates desire. Desire would block the effect anyway. Instead, it was framed as irrelevant, boring, impractical, or incomplete. And that worked. Most people ignored it. Those who didn't could not explain it, and those affected quietly recalibrated their pace. The danger was never that people would stop obeying. It was that they would stop hurrying. A system can replace belief. It can rewrite ideology. It can update language. It cannot easily recalibrate tempo once it is shared. This chapter dissolves the internal metronome that keeps people synchronized with collective stress. Without that metronome, coordination becomes optional rather than automatic. That is unacceptable to structures built on constant motion. So the knowledge was not banned. It was buried, placed where only those already saturated by acceleration would find it, presented without spectacle, without promise, without reward, because only those who had already exhausted the rhythm could receive it. This is why the book appears before everything changes. It appears when your internal pace no longer matches the world's demand. Not to convince you of anything, but to confirm what your nervous system has already noticed. You are no longer moving in time with the old rhythm, and once enough people step out of tempo, the music has to change. Not loudly, quietly, from the inside out. Chapter 7. The grief of the old timeline. There is a grief that arrives before loss, a sadness with no object, a heaviness without explanation, tears that do not belong to any event. Most people call it anxiety, mood, hormones, exhaustion, but sometimes it is none of those. Sometimes it is the old timeline dying. Not the dramatic kind of death, not an ending you can point to, a quiet expiration of a version of life that is still technically present, but no longer internally possible. You begin to mourn something that has not left yet. That is what makes it so confusing. The grief of the old timeline is not about what happened. It is about what will no longer be able to happen in the same way again. The future you were unconsciously living toward begins to dissolve, and the body feels the absence before the mind can name it. This is why you cry before you understand. Emotion does not wait for proof. The nervous system senses that a structure is collapsing, not externally, internally. The scaffolding of identity begins to loosen. The world still looks familiar, but the emotional contract you had with it is breaking. You cannot explain it. You just feel less attached. Certain dreams lose their weight. Certain fears lose their sharpness. Certain roles feel distant, and this distance hurts, because even pain has familiarity. Even struggle becomes home when you have lived inside it long enough. The old timeline, even if imperfect, was predictable. It had rhythm. It had urgency. It had a script you knew how to follow. The new timeline has none of that yet. So grief appears in the gap. You are not grieving the past. You are grieving the version of yourself that could still believe the old future was inevitable. That version is fading, and fading feels like loss. People rarely speak about this stage because it does not look like expansion. It looks like collapse. It looks like emotional instability. It looks like weakness, but it is neither. It is recalibration. The quantum field cannot shift without emotional residue. When a timeline closes, it leaves behind echoes. The heart notices what the mind denies, that something is ending even if nothing has ended officially. This is why the grief is silent. You may still laugh, still work, still speak normally, but underneath, something is releasing its grip. The old narrative is losing coherence. The life you were living toward is no longer emotionally available. This is the beginning of the shift, not excitement, grief, because the old self does not disappear cleanly. It dissolves slowly like ink in water. And during that dissolution, you feel everything that was attached to it. Hopes, expectations, unfinished stories, imagined versions of who you thought you had to become. You mourn without knowing what you are mourning. That is the sign. The grief of the old timeline is not depression. Depression is emptiness. This grief is fullness. It is the emotional overflow of a reality rearranging itself beneath your feet. You cry because the nervous system is releasing an identity it can no longer carry. You cry because the internal clock is stopping. You cry because urgency is leaving, and you do not yet know what replaces it. This is why the chapter is here. To tell you that the tears are not random. They are the first honest response to a life that is about to change. Not because you forced it, because the old timeline has reached completion. You are grieving the last moment where pretending was still possible. And once the grief passes, something strange happens. You do not become happier, you become quieter. And quiet is where the new timeline begins. Chapter 8. When your identity can't keep up. There comes a moment when reality moves faster than the identity built to navigate it. At first, this feels like confusion, then discomfort, then a quiet panic with no clear threat. You are still here. Your life still exists, Your name, roles, routines remain intact, but something is no longer synchronized. The world begins to respond to you as if you were already different, while internally you are still operating from an older version of yourself. Opportunities appear that do not match your self-image. Endings arrive before you feel ready. Situations resolve themselves without your usual effort, and your identity cannot keep up. Identity is slow. It is built from repetition, memory, and narrative. It needs consistency to feel real. It needs time to adjust. Reality does not grant it that time during a shift. When the quantum field accelerates, events reorganize first. Identity lags behind, trying to update itself using outdated information. This is where friction appears. You begin to feel like you are living someone else's life, like responses are arriving before you decided what to ask. Like the world is treating you as if you already crossed a line you do not remember crossing. This is deeply unsettling, because identity exists to provide continuity. It tells you who you are, what you want, what you can handle, what makes sense. When it fails, you lose your internal map, not all at once, in fragments. You notice it when your reactions feel delayed, when your old fears no longer activate on time, when achievements feel oddly flat, when losses do not hurt the way they used to. You are not numb, you are misaligned in time. The reality you are experiencing belongs to a future version of you that has not fully formed yet, and the current identity cannot process it efficiently. It tries to interpret events through outdated beliefs, outdated expectations, outdated limits. This creates a specific kind of distress, not pain, lag. You are always a step behind your own life. The mind tries to compensate. It analyzes more. It seeks explanations. It searches for labels. Anxiety appears not because something is wrong, but because the internal narrative is failing to keep pace. Identity wants to stabilize. Reality refuses. This is where many people attempt to force alignment. They rush to redefine themselves. They adopt new identities, new language, new beliefs. They try to catch up by pretending transformation has already completed. That does not work. Identity cannot be rushed without fracture. The collapse must happen first. When reality moves faster than identity, the old you begins to crack, not violently, quietly. Preferences change, desires lose clarity, motivations become inconsistent. What once defined you feels thin. This is not loss of self. It is shedding of a structure that cannot travel at this speed. The truth is simple and difficult. You cannot bring your old identity into a new timeline intact. Something has to be left behind. Not skills, not memory, but attachment to a fixed version of who you thought you were. This is why the phase feels unstable. You are between identities. The old one no longer fits. The new one has not consolidated yet. Reality does not wait for consolidation. It continues responding. This is why the shift feels relentless. Life keeps moving. Decisions keep presenting themselves. Consequences keep arriving. And internally, you are still rearranging. The discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is evidence of transition. Identity exists to serve coherence. When coherence changes, identity must dissolve and reform. This takes time. The field does not pause for it. That gap between external acceleration and internal reorganization is one of the most fragile moments in transformation. Many people retreat here. They attempt to slow reality down. They cling to old definitions. They reattach to urgency, struggle, or identity-driven effort. Others surrender, not dramatically, quietly. They allow the mismatch to exist without forcing resolution. These are the ones who pass through, because identity does not need to lead the shift. It needs to follow it. Eventually, something settles, not suddenly, gradually. A new sense of self begins to form, not around ambition or fear, but around responsiveness. the identity becomes lighter, more adaptive, less invested in being consistent. But before that happens, there is this phase, where reality is ahead of you, and the you thought you were cannot run fast enough to catch it. This is not a mistake, it is the design. The old identity was never meant to survive the shift unchanged. It was meant to break just enough to let something more accurate emerge. And that emergence does not happen through effort. It happens through allowing the lag, the moment you stop trying to catch up. Identity begins to reorganize on its own. And when it does, the world no longer feels ahead of you. It feels synchronized again, just not with the version of yourself you started with. Chapter 9. The silence that comes right before everything breaks open. There is a silence that does not feel peaceful. It feels suspended, a pause in the fabric of reality where nothing is wrong, but nothing is moving the way it used to. This silence arrives before the breakthrough, not after. It is the vacuum before the leap, the moment when the universe holds its breath. Most people misunderstand this phase. They assume they are stuck. They assume nothing is happening. They assume they have failed. But this silence is not absence. It is compression. In quantum terms, the field does not collapse into a new outcome through noise. It collapses through coherence, and coherence often requires stillness. The old timeline cannot dissolve while the system is still producing constant motion. The mind must quiet. The emotional turbulence must soften. The external world must appear to pause, not because the universe is inactive, but because it is rearranging. This is the stage where everything feels strangely empty. The things that used to excite you no longer pull. The things that used to scare you no longer grip. Even desire becomes quiet, as if it is waiting for permission to reappear in a new form. This is unsettling, because humans are trained to equate movement with life. If nothing is moving, we assume something is dying, and something is, but it is not you, it is the old structure. The silence before everything breaks open is the moment the previous reality loses momentum. The scripts stop working. The internal urgency fades. The external world stops reinforcing the old identity. You are left in a space with no clear instruction. This is the forbidden pause. The mind hates it. It tries to fill it with action, distraction, planning, explanation. It wants to force sound into the silence, but forcing sound delays the collapse. The universe does not open the next door while you are still pounding on the previous one. So the silence remains. It becomes heavier, not as punishment, as preparation. This is the breath held before the jump. In this phase, nothing external confirms the shift. There are no fireworks, no announcements, no obvious signs, only an internal sense that something is already irreversible, even though nothing has happened yet. That is the paradox. The most important changes begin in invisibility. The universe does not reveal the new timeline while you are still emotionally attached to the old one. It waits until attachment loosens, until urgency fades, until the nervous system stops gripping the familiar. Only then can the field collapse into the next configuration. This is why the silence feels lonely, because it removes external reinforcement. It removes noise. It removes the illusion of progress, and what remains is pure threshold. Many people leave here. They return to the old rhythm because the silence is too uncomfortable. They recreate urgency just to feel alive again. They chase something, anything, to avoid the emptiness of the pause. But the pause is not emptiness. It is the womb of the next reality. Nothing grows while being shaken constantly. The universe stills you before it expands you. The field quiets before it rearranges. The breath is held before the world breaks open. This chapter exists to tell you something crucial. If you are in the silence, you are not behind. You are on the edge. Do not confuse stillness with failure. Stillness is where the quantum collapse becomes possible. The leap does not begin with motion. It begins with surrender to the pause. Because the universe cannot open what comes next until you stop demanding that it arrive in the language of what came before. This is the last quiet moment, the last breath, the last suspension. And then, without warning, everything breaks open, not loudly, inevitably. Chapter 10. Synchronicities become aggressive. At first, synchronicities feel gentle, a coincidence, a small alignment, a strange little moment that makes you smile and move on. But there is a point where they stop being cute, they stop being poetic, they become aggressive, not violent, inevitable. The universe stops hinting and starts insisting. The same number appears too often, the same phrase repeats through different mouths. The same idea finds you from unrelated sources. People you have not thought about suddenly return. Doors close in sequences too precise to dismiss. Delays protect you with almost unnatural timing. Accelerations trap you before you can rationalize them. Synchronicity stops feeling like a sign. It starts feeling like a structure. And that is when the shift becomes undeniable. Because coincidence has randomness, aggressive synchronicity has direction. It is as if the field is narrowing, as if possibility is collapsing around a single thread. The timeline becomes less wide. The space for maybe begins to disappear. This is why it feels intense. You are no longer floating in infinite options. You are being pulled. Most people do not realize that synchronicity is not decoration. It is not the universe trying to entertain you. It is the field revealing coherence. When reality is about to change, coherence increases, patterns tighten, events begin to stack, the invisible becomes loud. This is not spirituality, it is physics at the level of meaning. When the quantum field begins to select an outcome, it does not do it silently. It leaves traces, it produces echoes before the event arrives. It creates alignment between unrelated points, as if the world is stitching itself together in front of you. And once this begins, it rarely stops. That is why it feels aggressive. The universe is not trying to convince you, it is moving. Synchronicities become unavoidable when your internal state is no longer compatible with the old timeline. The field responds by compressing the path. It reduces noise. It eliminates detours. It makes certain meetings inevitable, certain endings unavoidable, certain awakenings impossible to postpone. This is when people become afraid, not because something bad is happening, but because something is happening without permission. The mind wants to believe life is controlled through choice. Synchronicity reveals that life is also controlled through timing, and timing is not negotiated. When synchronicities become aggressive, you begin to feel watched by reality itself, not in paranoia, in precision. The world answers too quickly. Thoughts externalize too fast. The boundary between inner and outer becomes thin. You think something, and it appears. You avoid something, and it finds you. You delay something, and it accelerates anyway. This is the field tightening. This is the universe removing the illusion of randomness. Aggressive synchronicity is the universe's way of saying the shift is no longer optional. The old timeline is collapsing. The new one is arriving, and the space between them is filled with echoes. This is why this phase is exhausting, because it forces attention. You cannot sleepwalk through aggressive synchronicity. The world becomes too precise. The coincidences become too sharp. The repetition becomes too intentional. It is no longer a whisper, it is a pattern that follows you. And the deeper truth is this: synchronicities are not messages. They are symptoms. They are the side effects of a reality reorganizing itself faster than your mind can explain. When the shift begins, the universe does not send a letter. It rearranges the hallway so that you end up where you were always going, even if you do not know it yet. That is what makes them aggressive. Not because they are dramatic, but because they remove escape. When synchronicities become inevitable, the timeline has already chosen movement. The only thing left is your recognition, and recognition changes everything. Chapter 11. Reality starts responding differently. At first, nothing changes. The same streets, the same people, the same routines. Your life looks identical from the outside, and yet, reality starts responding differently. Not in events, in texture. The world feels slightly altered, as if the atmosphere has shifted by a fraction too small to explain but too large to ignore. Conversations land differently. Time moves with a strange elasticity. Things that once triggered you no longer hook into the same place. Things that once mattered begin to feel distant, like echoes from another room. The same life continues, but the fabric underneath it changes. This is one of the most disorienting stages of the shift because it offers no clear proof. There is no dramatic moment, no external collapse. Only the quiet sensation that the rules are no longer being applied the same way. You notice it in timing. Opportunities arrive too cleanly. Delays feel protective. Endings occur without chaos. You expect resistance, but it doesn't appear. You expect the old struggle, but the world does not respond with the same friction. Reality becomes smoother in some places, and strangely blocked in others, as if the universe is redirecting flow without explanation. This is what happens when the field has moved, but the surface has not caught up. The world is still the same stage, but the script has changed. The actors continue speaking, but the meaning behind the words feels thinner. The mind searches for reasons. It wants certainty, but certainty belongs to stable timelines. During a shift, certainty dissolves first. This is why the world begins to feel dreamlike, not because it is unreal, but because it is no longer anchored by the same emotional gravity. The old reality was heavy with urgency. The new one is lighter, faster, less attached to explanation. You begin to realize something unsettling. The universe is not responding to your actions anymore. It is responding to your state. Small shifts inside you create disproportionate effects outside. A thought changes timing. A decision collapses a path. A release creates acceleration. The relationship between inner and outer becomes immediate. This is when people become afraid of their own awareness, because the world is no longer delayed. Reality answers too quickly. You speak something, and it arrives. You resist something, and it intensifies. You surrender something, and it disappears. The same things continue, but the response pattern changes. The old timeline was dense. It required effort to move anything. The new timeline is responsive. It rearranges with less friction. And this responsiveness reveals something most people never want to admit. Reality was never as solid as it seemed. It was simply slow. Now it is faster, and speed reveals structure. This is why the shift feels like waking up inside the same life. You are still in the same place, but you are no longer inside the same world. The emotional contract has changed. The universe is no longer pretending to be neutral. It is participating. This participation is subtle at first. It shows up as strange ease, strange endings, strange alignments. The old struggles do not return on command. The old fears do not activate correctly. The old identity cannot recreate the previous gravity. The world has moved on without announcement, and the strangest part is that no one else may notice. Because the shift is not collective at first, it is personal. Your reality begins to respond differently because you are no longer broadcasting the old timeline internally. The field has adjusted. The coherence has tightened. The universe has begun collapsing toward a new configuration. The same things continue, but they no longer belong to the same reality. You are watching the old world through a new frequency. This is why the chapter is here, to tell you that the subtle difference is the real evidence. The shift is not loud, it is textural. It is the feeling that life is answering from a different place. And once you notice that, the old timeline cannot fully return, because you have already felt the fabric change. Chapter 12. The invisible point of no return. There is a point of no return that does not look like a moment. It looks like nothing. You are still in the same place, the same life, the same day. No door slammed, no announcement was made, no dramatic shift occurred, and yet you have already passed the point. This is what makes it invisible. Most people believe the point of no return is an event, a breakup, a move, a decision, a catastrophe, a breakthrough, something that can be named and remembered. But the deepest point of no return is internal. It happens quietly, before anything external changes. It is the moment you can no longer fully believe the old reality. Not because you hate it, because it no longer holds. You can still participate in it, but you cannot inhabit it the same way. The script continues, but it feels thin. The urgency returns sometimes, but it does not grip. The old fears still exist, but they do not organize you. You are still here, but you are no longer inside the same timeline. This point is not marked by action, it is marked by detachment. A subtle release you did not choose consciously. The nervous system stops clinging. The mind stops rehearsing. The identity stops insisting. And once that happens, the return becomes impossible. Because returning would require pretending that the detachment did not occur. You cannot unfeel the looseness. You cannot unsee the thinness of the old world. This is why the point is invisible. It does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives with a quiet sentence inside you. I can't go back to not knowing. Even if you cannot articulate what you know, even if nothing has changed, something has. The universe recognizes this point immediately. The field tightens. Synchronicities sharpen. Reality begins responding faster. Not because you asked, because you crossed. The point of no return is not punishment, it is coherence. Once you detach from the old timeline internally, the universe cannot fully stabilize it around you again. The old configuration loses its grip. The new one begins to form, whether you feel ready or not. This is why people often feel strange right here. They are not in chaos. They are not in resolution. They are in irreversibility without evidence. The mind panics because it wants proof, but proof comes later. First comes crossing. You may still try to return. You may recreate old habits, old narratives, old urgencies, but they feel staged, like costumes, like reenactments of a life you once lived sincerely. The sincerity is gone. That is the point. The invisible point of no return is the end of unconsciousness, not awakening as a concept, awakening as incompatibility. The old world can still be touched, but it cannot be entered fully. This is why the chapter ends here, because once you realize you have crossed, the rest is inevitable. The shift does not require your permission. It requires only that the old timeline can no longer hold you. You are still in the same place, but you are already past the point. And what comes next is not a choice. It is arrival. Chapter 13. The law that works too fast. There is a law that does not fail, not because it is powerful, but because it is fast. Too fast. This law does not ask if you are ready. It does not wait for emotional maturity. It does not negotiate with identity. It responds immediately, and that is precisely what makes it dangerous. Most manifestation systems are slow by design. They include delay, friction, effort, and repetition. Not because these elements are necessary, but because they protect the individual from receiving outcomes they cannot yet hold. Slowness is a buffer. This law removes the buffer. When activated, it collapses distance between intention and result. The field responds before the nervous system recalibrates, before identity reorganizes, before the emotional body integrates the change. Reality arrives early, and early arrivals are destabilizing. This is why people who trigger this law often feel disoriented rather than fulfilled. The result appears, but the internal structure to receive it has not finished forming. Success feels surreal. Loss feels muted. Desire feels confused. The manifestation works, but the person does not. This law bypasses preparation. It responds to coherence, not readiness. The universe does not evaluate your emotional capacity. It evaluates signal clarity. When internal contradiction drops below a certain threshold, the field collapses toward resolution, regardless of whether the human system can absorb it gracefully. This is where danger appears, not danger as punishment, danger as overload. When outcomes arrive before identity can update, the psyche fragments. People feel disconnected from their own lives. Achievements feel hollow. Relationships shift too quickly. Power arrives without context. Freedom arrives without grounding, and grounding matters. This is why ancient systems hid this law behind layers of ritual, symbolism, and delay. Not to mystify it, but to slow it down, to give the human system time to adapt. Modern interpretation removed the filters. Acceleration became the goal, and the cost became invisible. Fast manifestation creates a specific type of collapse, the collapse of meaning. When results arrive without emotional integration, the mind cannot attach narrative. Life begins to feel unreal, disconnected, untethered. People call this dissociation. But it is actually misalignment between speed and capacity. The law works too fast because it does not care who you think you are. It responds to who you are broadcasting beneath identity. When that signal sharpens, reality reorganizes instantly. This is why some people manifest dramatically and then disappear. Burn out, isolate, sabotage, retreat. Not because they failed, because they arrive too soon. The law does not distinguish between expansion and overload. It only collapses probability. It delivers the outcome that matches coherence. If your coherence outruns your nervous system, the result becomes destabilizing. This is the mechanism that was prohibited. Not the law itself, but unbuffered access to it, because societies can survive slow awakenings. They cannot survive mass acceleration without integration. Individuals can survive gradual transformation. They fracture under sudden expansion without structure. This is why this book exists, not to teach you how to activate the law, but to warn you that it is already active. If you are reading this, something inside you has already aligned beyond your previous capacity. The results are coming faster than your identity can track. The field has already responded. The danger is not in stopping it. You cannot. The danger is in misunderstanding it. Fast manifestation requires slower integration. The faster the outcome, the more deliberate the grounding must be. Silence, stillness, nervous system regulation, emotional digestion. Without that, acceleration becomes collapse. This chapter is not here to scare you. It is here to make you responsible. Because once you know this law exists, you are no longer innocent in how you interact with reality. The universe will continue responding quickly. The question is whether you will slow yourself enough to receive what arrives without breaking. The law works too fast, and now you know why it was hidden. Chapter 14. Fast change creates invisible enemies. The world does not react to your growth when it is slow. Slow change is acceptable. Slow change is familiar. Slow change gives everyone time to adjust their expectations of you, but fast change breaks the script. And when you break the script, something strange happens. Enemies appear without declaring themselves. Not enemies in the dramatic sense. Invisible enemies, quiet resistance, unspoken sabotage, a subtle shift in the atmosphere around you. Because society is not only built on rules, it is built on predictability. People do not relate to who you are. They relate to who you have been. And when you change faster than their mental version of you can update, friction forms, not because they hate you, because your acceleration exposes their stagnation. Fast change creates contrast, and contrast is uncomfortable. When you begin moving outside the expected rhythm, the world feels destabilized. Your success becomes suspicious, your calm becomes arrogance, your boundaries become selfishness, your silence becomes threat. Not because you are doing anything wrong, because you are no longer playing the role assigned to you. Every social environment has scripts. Who is the struggling one? Who is the stable one? Who is the caretaker? Who is the failure? Who is the dreamer? Who stays small, who never changes? And when you shift rapidly, you disrupt the distribution. The system must rebalance, so it reacts, not always consciously, but inevitably. This is where invisible enemies emerge. They do not attack directly. They question, they distance, they suddenly don't understand you anymore. They make jokes that are slightly sharp. They withdraw support that was once automatic. They become strangely silent when you speak about expansion. They begin rooting for your return to the old timeline, not because they want you to suffer, but because your transformation forces a mirror. Your acceleration asks a question their nervous system cannot answer. If you can change this fast, why haven't I? And that question is unbearable. So the mind resolves it through externalization. Something must be wrong with you. Fast change also threatens stability. People depend on your consistency to feel safe. If you evolve quickly, they feel the ground move. Even loved ones may resist, not out of cruelty, but out of nervous system disruption. You are becoming unpredictable, and unpredictability feels like danger to those still living inside scripts. This is why growth is often lonely, not because you are better, because you are out of sync. Fast manifestation does not only collapse probability, it collapses relationships with the old version of you. The invisible enemies are often not strangers, they are proximity. They are the ones who benefited from your previous self. Your old insecurities made them comfortable. Your old availability made them feel secure. Your old limits made them feel superior or needed. When those dissolve quickly, the social field reacts. This is why the chapter is forbidden, because no one wants to admit that expansion has consequences beyond the self. People want fast results. They do not want the social disruption that comes with them. But disruption is inevitable. When you exit the script, you become a variable, and variables trigger control mechanisms. The world will attempt to slow you down through subtle means, not through violence, through atmosphere, through doubt, through isolation, through the quiet pressure of belonging. This is why integration matters. You must become internally stable enough to remain coherent while external responses shift. Invisible enemies cannot harm you directly. They can only destabilize you if you still require external validation. Fast change exposes dependency. If your nervous system still seeks approval, sabotage will work. If your identity still needs permission, resistance will confuse you. But if you are grounded, the invisible enemies become irrelevant background noise. They are symptoms of your departure from the old timeline, not proof that you are wrong. This chapter is not telling you to fear people. It is telling you to understand the physics of scripts. When you break one, the environment reacts, not always maliciously, but predictably. Fast change creates invisible enemies because it reveals invisible contracts. And once you see those contracts, you stop signing them unconsciously. That is the real acceleration, not the manifestation, the liberation. Chapter 15. You will never be invisible to reality again. After this, you will not return to normal. Not because life becomes magical, because you become impossible to ignore. There is a moment after crossing everything in this book when you realize the truth is not that reality changes. The truth is that reality notices. It always noticed. But you were living as if you were invisible, as if your inner state did not matter, as if your nervous system was separate from outcomes, as if the field was neutral, as if time was random, as if you were simply surviving inside a fixed world. That illusion ends here. Once you understand the mechanism, you cannot unknow it. You cannot go back to believing that the universe is asleep. It isn't. Reality is responsive. It has texture. It has timing. It has coherence. And now you have seen what most people never see. The shift does not begin with events. It begins with frequency. It begins with saturation. It begins with the moment your internal world becomes too aligned to remain unanswered. That is why this book only appears once. Because it is not a book, it is a threshold. You were never meant to carry it forever. You were meant to cross it. And now, you have. From this point forward, life will still contain ordinary days, but you will feel what is underneath them. The silence before the leap, the tightening of synchronicity, the subtle fabric change, the invisible point of no return, the acceleration that creates reactions, the forbidden law that works too fast. You will recognize the field moving before the world catches up. And once you recognize that, you are no longer invisible to reality. The universe responds differently to those who are awake to timing. Not because they are chosen, because they are coherent. This is the responsibility, not power, responsibility. Because fast change is not a gift if you cannot hold it. And knowledge is not freedom if you use it unconsciously. So if you reach the end, do not rush. Do not chase outcomes. Do not demand acceleration. Instead, become stable enough to receive what is already approaching. The shift is not coming. It has already begun. And this was your warning, your threshold, your one-time book. After this, normal will never find you the same way again. And if you felt something inside you shift while listening, leave a comment with just one word. I crossed it. Because those who reach the end are never the same. And if you want the next hidden book before it disappears, subscribe now. This archive does not open twice.